My dad left a sealed envelope with his attorney and told him not to open it until after the will was read. That envelope blew up my entire family. Here's what was inside it and what I did about it. My father's name was Robert Callahan. Everyone called him Bob. I called him Dad. He was 67 years old, spent 32 years as a structural engineer, retired at 63, and spent his last 4 years doing exactly what he always said he would. Fishing on Lake Mercer every Saturday morning. Growing tomatoes he never got around to eating, calling me every Sunday at 7 p.m. without fail. He was consistent and deliberate, and he did not do things carelessly. That matters for everything that comes after this. He died on a Thursday in March, congestive heart failure. He'd had 2 warnings before the third one took him. The first one, back in 2019, was the one that got him organized. He sat me down at his kitchen table, a white oak table he built himself, sanded and oiled by hand, and walked me through everything. He had a will. He had a trust. He had a handwritten list of personal items with names next to each one. He told me I was the executor. He told me the house would go to me and my brother Derek, split evenly. He told me the investment accounts, which sat at roughly $340,000 at the time, would be divided 3 ways between me, Derek, and our half-sister Patris. Patris is from his first marriage. She's 12 years older than me, 53 now. She and my dad had a complicated relationship, but a functional one. She knew about the will. We'd all talked about it. And then he said something I didn't fully understand at the time. He looked at me across that kitchen table and said, "Nora, if anything funny happens after I go, you fight it. You hear me? You fight it." I thought he meant creditors, administrative nonsense. I had no idea. He died on a Thursday. We buried him on a Monday. By the following Wednesday, we were sitting in the office of his attorney, a man named Gerald Fitch, for the formal will reading. There were 5 of us in that room. Me, Derek, Patris, my Aunt Connie, who is my dad's younger sister and had no legal stake in anything but showed up anyway, which I thought was odd, and a woman I had never seen before in my life. Mid-30s, dark hair, quiet, sitting in the corner chair like she was trying to take up as little space as possible. I looked at Derek, he shrugged. I looked at Patris, she shook her head. Gerald Fitch read the will. It matched everything I remembered, the house to me and Derek. The investment account split 3 ways. His fishing rods to Derek, his mother's ring to me, his coin collection to Patris. Organized, thorough, very much like my father. Then Gerald reached into his briefcase and pulled out a second envelope. Sealed. He said my father had left specific instructions that it be opened after the will was read and not before. He was very specific about that order. He opened it and read it aloud. It was a handwritten letter, dated 14 months before my dad died, notarized by a different notary than the one on the will. In it, my father explained that he had a daughter he had never publicly acknowledged. Her name was Simone. She was 34. He had met her mother, a woman named Carol, briefly in 1988, during a period when he and my mother were separated for about 8 months. He hadn't known about the pregnancy. Carol never told him. He found out about Simone only 3 years ago, when Simone tracked him down through a DNA testing service. The letter said he had spent 3 years quietly getting to know her. It said he felt he owed her something, even though none of it was his fault. It said he wanted her to receive $85,000 from the investment accounts as an acknowledgement of what she had missed out on. And it said, and this is the part that changed everything, he wanted that distributed before any other division of the investment accounts took place. Gerald Fitch finished reading. The room went completely silent. Then Patris said, "Absolutely not." The woman in the corner, Simone, didn't move, didn't react, just sat there with her hands folded in her lap. Patris stood up. She's a former paralegal, and when she gets angry, she gets very precise in a way that makes it worse. She said the letter was not part of the legal will. She said it had no binding authority. She said she'd never heard of this Simone person, and she was not going to watch $85,000 disappear from her inheritance because of a letter that could have been written by anyone. Gerald explained, calmly, that the letter was handwritten and notarized and would likely be admitted as a testamentary instruction in probate. Not simple to dismiss. Patris said, "I'll be talking to my own attorney by end of day." Then she sat back down. Derek said nothing, he just looked at the table. Aunt Connie, who again had no legal stake in any of this, said, Bob always was careless with other people's feelings. I looked at Simone. She still hadn't said a word. Something about that made me pay attention. After the meeting, I introduced myself to her in the parking lot. She was polite, reserved. She told me she hadn't asked for any of this. She said she'd spent 3 years having quiet dinners with my father at a diner 30 minutes from his house. That's where he'd asked her to meet, while he figured out how to tell the family. Then she held out her phone. There were dozens of photos. My dad at a diner table, smiling. My dad with both hands wrapped around a coffee mug the way he always did. My dad looking at this woman across a laminate tabletop like she was someone he'd been waiting a long time to know. Her last dinner with him was 6 weeks before he died. I stood in that parking lot and scrolled through photo after photo, and something landed hard in my chest. This was him. This was exactly what he would do. Patient, private, deliberate. He'd found out he had a daughter, and instead of panicking or rejecting the whole thing, he just started showing up. Quietly, 30 minutes away, where nobody would see. I handed the phone back to Simone. She looked at me steadily, waiting. I said, "Thank you for showing me those." She nodded, then she said, "He talked about you, you know. He said you were the one who would know what to do." I told her I'd be in touch. I drove home and sat in my car in the driveway for 20 minutes. Then things moved fast. Patris filed an objection with the probate court within a week. She hired an attorney named Ted Mallory, who had a reputation for dragging things out, and Ted filed a motion arguing the sealed letter was not a valid testamentary document and should not be considered in the asset distribution. He also filed a motion to remove me as executor, claiming I had a conflict of interest because I had spoken to Simone in the parking lot. That one almost made me laugh. The investment accounts were frozen pending the dispute. The house wasn't in dispute, but we couldn't sell it or do anything with it until the accounts were settled. The estate totaled roughly $412,000 at the time of death, $340,000 in investments, $68,000 in checking and savings, and a house appraised at $310,000. Derek called me the day after Patris filed. He said, "I don't know, Nora. Patris has a point. We didn't know this woman 2 weeks ago." I said that wasn't the point. The point was what Dad wanted. Derek said he needed more time to think. Then I got added to a group chat. Patris had created it. It included Derek, Aunt Connie, 2 cousins I barely spoke to, and my dad's old friend from work, a man named Phil. The chat was titled Estate Questions. Patris's first message was a bullet point summary of her attorney's position. The sealed letter was invalid. Simone had no standing. Anyone who supported distributing $85,000 to a stranger was acting against the family's interests. Phil replied with one message. He said, "Bob told me about his daughter about 2 years ago. He was proud of her. Whatever he wrote in that letter, that's what he wanted." Patris removed Phil from the group chat within 10 minutes. That was when I stopped waiting and started working. I went to my dad's house. I had a key as executor, and I spent 2 full weekends going through everything. His filing cabinet, his desk, his laptop, which I'd gotten the password for from the executor paperwork, his email going back 4 years. Being in that house was hard. His reading glasses were still on the end table next to the couch. There was a half-finished crossword puzzle on the kitchen counter, folded open to Tuesday, the day before he went to the hospital for the last time. The tomato seedlings he'd started in little plastic cups on the windowsill had died without water. The whole house smelled like him, wood oil and coffee, and something faintly like cedar. I stood in the kitchen for a long moment before I could make myself get to work. Here's what I found. First, 41 emails between my father and Simone from 2021 to just 8 weeks before he died. Ordinary stuff. How she was doing. Questions about her job, she's a physical therapist. Him asking about her apartment, her cat, whether she'd talked to her mother recently. Her asking about his health after his second cardiac episode. These were not the emails of someone trying to extract money. They were emails between 2 people carefully building something from scratch. Second, a handwritten note in my dad's desk that said, "Simone, $85K, from Investment Act before split, Gerald knows." Same handwriting as the letter. I called Gerald Fitch. He confirmed my father had discussed this with him verbally at least twice, and that the sealed letter had been drafted with his guidance. Third, receipts. My dad had paid for a laptop in 2022, $1,200 with Simone's name on the delivery, and $4,500 toward a continuing education course she took for her physical therapy license. Small amounts in the context of the estate, but documented. Her name, his credit card. Fourth, a prior version of the will from 2020, before he knew about Simone. It matched the current will exactly in every way except one: Simone wasn't in it, because she didn't exist in his life yet. That was important. It proved the sealed letter was an intentional addition, not a forgery, not something someone had engineered after the fact. I put together a file, printed everything, organized it with labeled tabs, brought it to my own attorney, a woman named Deborah Vance, who I'd found through a colleague referral. Deborah went through it for about 45 minutes. Then she said, "This is actually a strong case for the letter being honored." She explained that in our state, handwritten testamentary instruments, documents expressing testamentary intent, in the deceased's own handwriting, signed and dated, could be admissible in probate even outside the formal will, especially with corroborating evidence. She said the combination of the notarization, Gerald's verbal confirmation, the emails, the receipts, and the handwritten note made it very hard to argue the letter was fraudulent or unintentional. She also said the motion to remove me as executor was a pressure tactic and likely to fail. I told Deborah to file whatever we needed to file. Before the hearing, I tried once to reach Patris directly. I called her on a Tuesday evening. She picked up, which surprised me. I told her I wasn't calling to argue. I said I understood she'd been blindsided, and so had I, and that I thought we might be able to reach a family settlement that honored what Dad wanted without going to court. I said I'd be willing to sit down with her and a mediator. There was a long pause. Then Patris said, "You want me to sit down and negotiate how much of my inheritance to hand to a woman I've never met?" I said that wasn't exactly how I'd frame it. She said, "That's exactly what it is, Nora, and the answer is no, see you in court." Then she hung up. I put the phone down and went back to organizing my files. In the weeks leading up to the hearing, Aunt Connie called my mother. My parents had divorced when I was 22, but Aunt Connie had stayed in touch with her and told her I had taken the side of my dad's, quote, illegitimate kid and was tearing the family apart. My mother, to her credit, called me immediately, heard the whole story, and said, "Your father always handled things his own way on his own timeline. This sounds exactly like him." Then Aunt Connie posted something on Facebook. She didn't name Simone, but she wrote a vague, sad post about grief being made worse by people who came out of nowhere with claims and divided families just when they needed to come together. About 20 people liked it. 2 cousins commented in agreement. I screenshotted it and sent it to Deborah, who said it wasn't legally relevant, but noted it anyway. The group chat had gone quiet since Phil got removed. Then Derek posted in it. He wrote that he'd reviewed the evidence I'd gathered, and he believed Dad had been clear about what he wanted. He said he wasn't contesting the letter. Patris replied, "Fine, you've made your position clear." Then she removed both me and Derek from the group chat. The probate hearing was on a Tuesday in May, about 7 weeks after the will reading. Small courtroom. The judge was a woman in her late 50s who looked like she had seen every version of this exact situation. Deborah presented our evidence. Ted Mallory presented Patris's objections. Patris testified that she had been her father's daughter for 53 years and had never once heard the name Simone. She said she had no way to verify the letter's authenticity and that distributing $85,000 to an unverified claimant would harm the legitimate heirs. Then Deborah called Gerald Fitch. Gerald testified that Robert Callahan had discussed his intention to provide for Simone verbally on 2 separate occasions. He testified that he remembered the day the sealed letter was drafted in his office clearly, because my father had brought in a printed draft and Gerald had specifically recommended the notarization. Gerald was not a warm man, but he was precise and credible. Then Deborah submitted the emails, the receipts, the handwritten note, and the prior will. Ted Mallory objected to almost all of it. The judge overruled him on almost all of it. Then Simone testified. She didn't perform. She didn't cry. She just answered questions. She said she'd first contacted my father in November 2020 after a DNA match through a testing service. She said they met for the first time in January 2021 at a diner in Holt County. She said he told her that first meeting that he hadn't known about her and that he was sorry. She said she hadn't wanted to disrupt his family and they'd agreed to keep things quiet while he figured out what to do. She said the last time she saw him, 6 weeks before he died, he told her he was going to be updating some things and he wanted her to know he hadn't forgotten about her. Ted Mallory cross-examined her for about 20 minutes and got nothing useful. She was calm and she stuck to facts. The judge said she'd issue a ruling within 2 weeks. Those 2 weeks were not quiet. The evening after the hearing, Patris sent me a direct message. It said, "I hope you understand you've destroyed this family for a stranger." I didn't reply. Derek called me the next morning. His tone had shifted. He said, "I didn't know Dad had been in contact with her for 3 years. Nobody told me that." I said I hadn't known either, until I went through his emails. Derek was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "The photos she had, at the diner, did you see those?" I told him I had. I told him Dad looked happy in them. Derek said, "Yeah, he did." That was the closest Derek got to saying he'd changed his mind, but it was enough. The ruling came on a Friday morning. Deborah called me at 9:47 a.m. The judge found that the sealed letter met the statutory requirements for a holographic testamentary instrument in our state. She found the corroborating evidence, Gerald Fitch's testimony, the emails, the receipts, the handwritten note, sufficient to establish that the letter represented Robert Callahan's genuine testamentary intent. She ordered $85,000 distributed to Simone Callahan before the remainder of the investment accounts were divided among the 3 remaining beneficiaries. She also denied the motion to remove me as executor, noting that speaking to a potential beneficiary in a parking lot did not constitute a conflict of interest. Ted Mallory filed a notice of intent to appeal. It was reviewed and denied 4 months later. Patris paid her attorney's fees out of her own pocket. Ted Mallory was not a cheap man. Here is where everything landed. Simone received her $85,000. I transferred it to her in August. She sent me an email 2 days later that I've read probably 6 times. She said she didn't know how to thank me. She said she knew it would have been easier for me to look the other way. She said she wished she'd had more time with our father. She used the word our, and I noticed it and I didn't mind. The remaining $255,000 in investment accounts was split 3 ways. Me, Derek, and Patris each received $85,000. The house sold in September for $298,000 after fees, taxes, and minor repairs, $149,000 each for me and Derek. The $68,000 in checking and savings covered probate costs, attorney fees, estate taxes, and final expenses. Deborah's fee came to $14,200, paid out of the estate as an executor expense. Derek and I still talk. We had Thanksgiving together this year. We didn't go over any of it directly, but we didn't need to. Patris and I have not spoken since the parking lot of Gerald Fitch's building on the day of the will reading. I don't expect that to change. Aunt Connie sent me a Christmas card. I didn't send one back. Phil, my dad's old friend from work, sent me a text in October. It said, "Bob would be glad you did right by her." I saved it. Simone and I have had coffee twice. It's slow going. We're not sisters in any way that feels natural yet, but she's told me things about those dinners with our dad that I hadn't known, that he talked about me at those diner tables, that he said I was the one who would always do the hard thing if it needed doing. I didn't know what to say to that. I just said I was glad he'd found her. Here's what I keep coming back to. My dad built things carefully. The kitchen table, the will, the 3 years of quiet dinners with a daughter nobody knew he had. He didn't do anything carelessly. He worked at his own pace in his own way, and he was always thinking ahead even when it didn't look like it. The sealed letter wasn't him being secretive. It was him being methodical. He knew that letter would cause a fight. He knew Patris would push back hard. And he sat me down at that kitchen table years earlier and told me to fight if something funny happened. He had planned for that too. I think he was proud of me. I hope he was. So, was I wrong to go all the way to probate court over this, when it would have been easier to let Patris have her way and just split the money 3 ways and move on? Some days it feels like the clearest thing I've ever done. Other days, I wonder if I should have pushed harder for a family settlement before it went to a judge, if I could have saved more relationships. But then I remember Simone's face in that parking lot, reserved, braced for dismissal, and my dad's voice at that kitchen table saying, "You fight it." I think I did the right thing, but I want to know what you would have done. Drop it in the comments. I read every single one.